there's a man came walking into a village, stranger. And he walked into the center square of the village, and some people came up to him and said, "You're a stranger." He says, "Well, I suppose I am." And they said, "So what are you doing around here?" He says, "Well, I'm just passing through." And they said, "Well, what do you do?" And he says, "Well, if you're talking about labor," he says, "I'm not much of a man for a trade. I don't do work." They said, "How do you get by? How do you eat?" And he says, "I use this." And they said, "That's a stone." He said, "That's right. I don't eat the stone itself. I make stone soup with it." And they say, "What's stone soup?" And he says, "You never had stone soup?" And they said, "No, never have." He says, "Would you like to try some? I'll make you up a batch." And they said, "Sure." He says, "Well, I'll need a pot with some water in it and maybe get a fire going. Can we do that and get this thing rolling?" They said, "Sure thing." So somebody brought a pot filled with water. Somebody else was building up a fire. And he took that stone and he dropped it right into that pot of water. And he was standing there stirring it, and he says, "It takes a while for all the flavors to come together." He says, "But you know what? You've never had stone soup, so it's kind of a peculiar flavor at first. It's something you kind of got to get used to. It's pretty good, but some people like to ease it up. Something a little more familiar, like maybe chop up an onion or some celery, some things like that." Somebody says, "I got an onion." And somebody says, "I'll go get some celery." And they brought it over and they chopped it up and put it in the water. And as the water started to come to a boil, the man took a spoon and he tasted it. He says, "This is pretty good. It's coming there. It takes a while, you know." A lot of people like to thicken it up because right now stone soup is basically a broth. But if you want to thicken it up and bring some carrots or some potatoes, something like that, somebody says, "I got some potatoes." Somebody said, "I'll bring a couple of carrots." And they chopped it all up and put it in the pot. And after a while, he says, "You know, I forgot. I'm mostly a vegetarian, so it doesn't bother me. But if you want to add some meat flavor to it, you're free to do so. Bring a ham hock or something." Somebody says, "I got one of those." And they brought it and they put it in the water. And they took a sip from it after a while. He says, "Come along pretty good. I suppose you might like some seasonings in it, a little salt, maybe some pepper." Somebody says, "I'll bring some salt." Somebody goes and gets the pepper. They add it in. And after a few more minutes, he says, "I think it's pretty much ready." And so somebody says, "I got some bowls." And somebody said, "I'll go get a ladle." And they brought it all over and he scooped out a ladle full for everybody. And they were sitting there eating that soup. And somebody said, "This is awfully good soup. It's hard to believe that you can make a soup this good out of a stone." And that is my story.